Today is May the 27th, 2009. I have the privilege of interviewing a close friend of mine who's also a very accomplished music minister, clinician, professor of music, Silvester Henderson. He's also the music minister at the Palmacia Baptist Church. He is also a professor of music at Los Medanos College in Pittsburgh, California. He's a pretty well-known fella locally, nationally. He puts on gospel concerts annually that brings several noteworthy artists to the local area. And he gave me an opportunity today to interview him to talk about gospel music, music ministry in general. And this is for a class assignment for Dr. McCoy's class, Worship and Music in the Faith Community at Golden Gate Baptist Theological Seminary in Mill Valley. So the interview is going to start. I'm going to ask Professor Henderson a few questions, and his responses would be totally up to him. And one of the questions, first question, Professor Henderson, would you mind introducing yourself?
Okay, my name is Silvester Henderson. As Reverend Lawson said, Martin. I am the music minister at Palmacia Baptist Church. I've been there 28 years. I've worked in several capacities at the church. I have a pretty full life in terms of experience. I had an opportunity to work prior to Palmacia. I worked as a minister of music of a church called Church of the Good Shepherd Baptist, and I was also on the music staff at Third Baptist Church in San Francisco. In addition to those tasks, I was also, as a child, I played for Holiness Church, and I also was a musician at two local Baptist churches, Foothill Baptist Church, as well as Harmony Baptist Church down in Oakland. Served as a professor of music in piano and voice and theory at San Francisco State University for 16 years. And then I ran a nationally renowned choir at the University of California, Berkeley, where I actually retired 2 years ago as a half-time professor. And kind of did that. I've worked several jobs where the jobs have overlapped. In fact, this is probably the most relaxed schedule I've ever had, in that now I'm only holding 2 posts, but historically I've held 3 or 4 posts simultaneously. And in addition to being at UC Berkeley for 20 years and SF State for 16, I also work now as a department chair of very, very well-known two-year college in Pittsburgh, California, Los Medanos College, where I'm the department chair, and I'm also responsible for all the choirs and all the voice classes.
All right. Seemed like you've been pretty busy.
Too busy.
Too busy for a whole lot of years.
Yeah.
But I know a lot of success. I can attest to the fact that a lot of success has come from your diligence and working tirelessly. Another question is, do you consider your work with music a calling from God?
The work in the church I consider to be a great calling. You know what? I don't know if I would say it was a spiritual calling, but I can say that as a child, I had a great passion and love for gospel music, and playing in the church fulfilled an emotional joy that nothing else did. I think music itself, I think I was born to do what I'm doing. And I think music itself, the talent that God gave me, was a calling. I think the opportunity to work in the church was both a calling and also became employment, and also it's an opportunity. It's been an opportunity over many, many years for me to advance my skills, because you have to have people to work with in this particular genre in order to advance your skills. So I would say it's a calling, and it's also sort of coupled with being a very enriched employment.
Okay. All right. How long would you say you've been involved with gospel music?
I'm 48 since I was 8 years old.
Wow.
So for 40 years.
Wow.
I grew up in a real complicated home, I'll tell you that. And as a child, there was a lot of probably difficult things that was part of my upbringing. And one of the things I used to do as a child, when many children see difficult things, sometimes some kids may act out in violence, some kids may act out in drugs, sex, and whatever. For whatever the reason, I used to go in the closet in my little room, and I would just sing church songs. And it always would make me feel better. In fact, as a child growing up, I was this overweight kid, and when my mom would be cooking, I'd be in the kitchen with pots and pans singing all these praise songs from this little church. And I remember seeing a lot of difficult things growing up as a kid. And I remember always praying and asking the Lord to fix things. But I would always, for some reason, it was always a song in my mind, even as a little bitty kid.
Isn't that amazing? Amazing. My next question I would ask is, you kind of answered it there, but a sense of fulfillment. I know you've had difficult times. You've had times when you wanted to play, probably times where you didn't want to play necessarily. Through it all, over your 40 years, has playing given you a sense of fulfillment that validates why you still do?
Yeah. In fact, I have to remind myself, because when I first started playing for the church and I first started teaching, I had so much excitement inside of me as a young man. I never looked at churches or concerts or anything as a way of being noted or famous or any of that. It wasn't until I got older and started being, quote, a minister of music at a large community congregation that all the issues of people and politics and importance and status came into being, because I just loved playing the piano for the church. It didn't matter to me whether I was playing for a big church or whether I was playing for a small church. So it took me a minute, took me a little while. I would say probably into my early 30s before I finally started understanding that people really attach a lot of social prestige with playing for the church. Remember, once again, that originally I was doing music because it was just what I did. It was part of who I am, part of what I wanted to be, and it was the greatest passion in my life. So when I started playing for the big church, and I remember having a difficulty playing for the church because I never looked at the job as being anything about anything but doing work for the Lord and having a good time. I never really looked at it originally as a place where you get power and prestige. It wasn't until I got older that I realized that people really develop all these other unessential elements that attach to church work. And I have to remind myself now, because over the years I am a very noted person, I have to remind myself, and sometimes I get a little sad now, because I have to remind myself to always take myself back to that basic fulfillment of just liking to play for the church, void of kind of going back to that feeling that I had when I was a kid. I just wanted to play the piano for the church. I didn't want to play because of anything. I just wanted to play.
Yeah.
So it is very fulfilling, but it's also been complicated simultaneously. But I would say that the fulfillment is what I have to remind myself. And when I get really, really tired and weary, I always go back to the fact that, sometimes when I play the piano, I can become lost in what I'm doing and I don't have to worry with anybody. So that's just, I guess it's kind of like an athlete just doing his thing.
Yeah.
So when you play and you really enjoy playing, sometimes you can become so engrossed in what you're doing that you really sort of tune everybody out. So from that standpoint, it's a great sense of fulfillment.
All right. And I'm certain there are concerns that you may have had, some may have been dealt with, but what areas of concern do you have within music ministry?
I think the biggest area of concern that's a really open-ended question because there's quite a few. But I think the biggest area of concern that I have is that most churches, and you have to realize I've been dedicated to one congregation, so I've lived through many histories of this congregation for almost 30 years. I've been there 28 and a half years. And
what church is that?
Promise Baptist Church in Hayward, California. I think the thing that concerns me is that people are not honest with their own abilities, but yet the minister of music is given the task, given the burden of trying to help people live up to a fantasy that even the Lord could not give them. Meaning that people sometimes when it comes to music, especially in gospel music, because gospel music deals with music that is not necessarily written down, it is what you hear. People sometimes mistake a person with exceptional talent, assuming that they can do what that person did. And the challenge that the music minister has is always fighting that popular song in the mind of the people in the church. And, having a group of people, for instance, someone like Kirk Franklin or Walter Hawkins or Yolanda Adams or many of the great gospel celebrities who are trained and who are more gifted in song, having them to sing in a trio or a group is different than having an 80-year-old woman standing next to a 13-year-old kid who's standing next to a 70-year-old man who's tone deaf. But the reality is that the passion, somehow people in church think that when you pay a music minister money, and especially in the black church, because the African American church, unfortunately, has a very difficult time in stability when it comes to economically supporting their leaders, because when they pay leaders in the African American church, they develop unrealistic expectations. Those expectations become where you become the miracle worker, where simply the 80-year-old mama or the 70-year-old fella can only sing to the capabilities of who they are. And then you also have to look at the type of emotions that are attached to people who attend certain religions. There are some people who are generally more demonstrative in their motor skills, and no one thinks about this, but people walk Baptist, people walk Methodist, people walk sanctified, people walk holiness, and many times you will find sometimes a Caucasian person sometimes who may be very, very poor and grow up in a grassroots Pentecostal church may have more motor ability and the ability to emote more than a person who's African American who grew up in the very conservative Baptist church. And so it becomes very difficult when you're trying to plan music because the people have this unrealistic expectation that they want you to create what the radio does. So the challenge is, how can the music minister fulfill his or her own dreams, even with their own limitations, keep the music going, fulfill the congregation, because once again, the music minister is generally responsible for 75 to 80% of the entire service, where the pastor comes on at the last minute. Even though the pastor is the CEO, they don't get all of the stress on the Sunday morning service. It's the choir. So basically, the music minister is kind of like the dumping ground for the congregation's dissatisfaction, but it also becomes the trophy for the congregation when everything goes well. So it's very, very complicated. It's extremely complicated.
Yeah, I can just imagine and a lot of what's done behind the scenes by the music minister probably does not get enough, not recognition, so to speak, but it goes without mentioning. And I've noticed that often the work that goes into the success of a worship service relies heavily upon the preparation of the music minister.
But it also relies on the relationship that the music minister has with its members. Yeah. But its members are impacted by the congregation members. Yeah. And the congregation members are impacted by the perception that the pastor of the church has for the music minister. So the music minister really has a very difficult time working in a congregation unless the leader of the church values him or her as an integral part of their administrative team.
Right. And piggybacking on that question, I have another question. How critical is the senior pastor within the function of the music minister's role? I don't know if that's clear, but is it, a better question may be, does the senior pastor help and hurt?
Oh yeah, I think the senior pastor is like the principal of the school, or like the head coach of a football team. The senior pastor is the one who gives the validation to the congregation that it's okay to follow the leadership of this person. If the senior pastor and the music minister have a great relationship where they dialogue and where the senior pastor understands all the implications, then he or she can help the music minister in that. First of all, they won't allow the congregation to place unrealistic expectations, knowing the expectations of the department they have. Meaning that the senior pastor can't look at a choir full of old women of 20 people and say, I want you to create a hip-hop gospel song. Okay. That's just totally impossible. But if the senior pastor is unrealistic, that just becomes another burden to the music minister. And then it becomes difficult because the senior pastor really is the person who is I don't care how powerful a music minister is. A music minister, and I can attest to this having been in the church for years, can be the most important person in terms of the community, but the way the Bible ordains it, it is the voice of the leader of the church who simply people take their heartfelt directions from. The music minister gives instructions as it relates to music. The music minister could have a concert and pack a church and put the greatest concert on. But if the pastor themselves don't give a stamp of approval to the music minister, basically what has happened, the music minister is working really for nothing. Doesn't mean that the music minister doesn't love God or have a relationship with God and not called. But from a human standpoint, and from a biblical standpoint, the voice that is responsible for leading the congregation is the leader of the congregation, which is the pastor, not the music minister. But the difficulty is that the music minister becomes really the physical one who is responsible for the part that brings people, sort of like the marketing specialist. He or she becomes like the marketer that brings people to the church so that they can actually hear the heart of the church, which is the Word of God. But that becomes very difficult because you generally have in music people and situations where people are trying to pit one against the next. And so the senior pastor is real critical because he or she has to exercise the wisdom to understand the limitations and also demonstrate love to the music minister as a human being. Yeah. If you are to have success, if not, you end up having a situation where you have a very, very frustrated and depressed music minister who can do two things. They can either stay and be frustrated, or you can continue to recycle new leaders in, and that's typically what people do in churches. And I find that in most churches, whether they're African American based, Latino based, music based, the largest, most complicated relationship is always the pastor and the music minister, because they're two powerful positions. One is more of a marketer, one is like the final stamp of approval, but it has to be where there's equal respect. So the music minister can't work well if he doesn't respect the leadership of the pastor. But then the pastor has to also treat the music minister like he or she is valuable and they're a human being. And that's where I find that many of the complications. Do I think the role of the pastor is critical in the music ministry? From a support standpoint, absolutely yes. From a standpoint of giving leadership, from a standpoint of giving day-to-day instruction, no. But from a standpoint of leadership instruction for the congregation to allow the music leader to give the pastor to the congregation what he or she wants, absolutely yes.
All right.
But that's one of those complicated.
Very complicated. And I didn't want us to, because I knew that was something that we can have a whole interview on, specifically that topic.
Oh yeah.
And that topic could take us hours upon hours.
Yeah.
Another question I would say, what training, I know you've had extensive training, but what training have you received in music or in music theory?
Music, I received, coming up as a child, I studied individually. I studied classical piano a lot. Originally I was to be, I have an undergraduate degree in classical piano performance with an emphasis in choral conducting. The difficulty is that educational institutions don't prepare you for being able to minister in the African American congregations. The educational arena prepares you to be able to primarily minister more in your more Caucasian Southern Baptist churches, or churches that are more Anglo-Saxon in its composition. But there's a total breakdown, and that was one of my desires for wanting to become a professor as well. There's a total breakdown in terms of the value of black music as it relates to the educational institution. So I would say the training that I received from that in terms of the African American side was all what I kind of learned myself. So I learned how to infiltrate my formal training along with all of my practical training. So I grew up in a holiness church, and so I was studying classical music, but then playing for this really grassroots holiness church at night. So I kind of like mixed the two. So I kind of taught myself a lot of stuff, and I kind of realized with all the loopholes, and that I would gather information from the educational side, and then I would go to church and see people doing something completely different and realize the two worlds don't mix. So I tried to come up with a great enough balance in order to bridge them all together. So I have a bachelor's degree in classical piano performance and choral conducting with the emphasis in music education from San Francisco State. And then my master's degree from San Francisco State was a choral conducting degree with a specialized emphasis in African American music. So I did a comparative analysis between it was called a comparative analysis from Bach to gospel. I compared traditional Bach chorales to, at that time, contemporary choral gospel selections.
Wow. What would you say is your philosophy of church music? If philosophy is...
My philosophy of church music is, first of all, because philosophy means value. And how you see the world. That's how I would define it. I think that the philosophy of the church has to be composite of what the philosophy of the leader, what type of pastor do you have, and what type of congregation members do you have. Meaning that if you have a pastor who comes from this is an example, you have a pastor who has been delivered from a world of I would say ill repute in a sense, and he now has become a really powerful beacon in the community, but he used to be a drug gangbanger, for instance, or a person who listened to a lot of R&B and hip hop and all those different things. Chances are, one, he's going to attract people because people join churches based on the personality of the leader, and chances are, one, he's going to attract people that are like he is, and so I think the philosophy should be based on the composition makeup. I think that if you're looking at a more grassroots church, then the philosophy should be music that is more attractive, maybe more urban in nature. If you go into, for instance, a church like Third Baptist, or let's say First Presbyterian Church in Berkeley, or First Congregational Church, where you probably have a lot of the composition may be diverse, but you're probably going to have more white congregants than African American congregants, and the African American congregants are more, I don't want to say educated because education becomes a complex word, but people who have followed a more traditional learning module where they have a certain lifestyle where they don't like to be demonstrative. You may have a program where a lot of concert music and hymns and things are used, things that are not demonstrative. So I think basically what I'm saying is that the philosophy of a church music program has to coincide with the type of members that you have, whatever that is, and whomever they are.
All right.
In other words, country folks like country music.
That's right. And you fit the music around the composition of the congregants.
Right. And you can create a very full and rich music diet within the composition of the type of church.
Yeah. And that takes a skillful music minister. Only a person with the adequate skill level, like yourself, could come into a situation, because a music minister has to be able to adapt and adjust. Say, for instance, a music minister on day one for a new congregation would have to, first of all, have to take in the dynamic of what is there and then fit.
But the difficulty with that is that music ministers in African American church are not hired based on skill. In the black church, this is the critical thing. Remember, black church music leaders are hired based on their keyboard skills, not on their skills for making decisions. It's very different. In white churches, people are based not on their abilities to play, but on their abilities to lead. So in the black church, whoever is the greatest musician is the one who's the music minister. And that has been something that has come down through Thomas Dorsey era. In fact, there was just a young lady who graduated from the University of Pittsburgh who did a doctoral thesis on the history of the gospel piano styles. And her name was Adela Johnson. And one of the things we were talking about, she's an ex-student of mine at UC Berkeley, that we've done a lot of research to realize that in the black, because remember in the black church, the minister of music doesn't necessarily mean the choir director. Choral music in the white sense of the word, and I want to use the word white negatively, but in the more Anglo-Saxon sense of the word, it's completely different. It's like apple and oranges. You know, you're talking about a more UC Berkeley or San Francisco State or Harvard way of looking at music, where choir members warm up and the chord director stands in front of you. It's completely different in the black church. The person who was over the music program is the head musician. The head musician may not know anything about singing. Now it kind of seems ridiculous from looking at it from one standpoint, but in reality it's not ridiculous, because remember, African American music is not melodic, it's rhythmic. So it follows a complete different mindset, and that's historically why it's difficult for the black musician to play sometimes in the non-black church. It is difficult for the white musician to play in the black church, because the mindset is completely different. There is no understanding because they don't mix. Now, there's a new market of musicians and churches that are springing up now that is seemingly mixing the two philosophies together. One more natural and urban, one more scholastically trained. And you find in the more non-denominational, multicultural churches that you sometimes have a different mix. But then the difficulty with that is that the authenticity of the urban sound from African American music is lost. So this is another complicated topic. Another hour complicated.
All right. So I'll tell you what. What would you say, if you care to share, would be, say, a strength or weakness, if any? You know.
I think my greatest strength is that I have the ability to get people to do what I don't do well myself. I'm a master organizer. That is my greatest strength in everything that I do. I can motivate people to perform and do things that I don't do well myself. I think my weakness has been that, and someone probably would say, that's not a weakness, that's what an asset. But I think my weakness has been is just that I sometimes want more from a group of singers or a department or a congregation more than really what is expected or really what they want. And that has brought me a lot of frustration over the years. I'm a person who thinks about a lot of stuff, and a lot of times want people to be very excited about what they do. Or I come up with all these great ideas, but I've had to learn over the years to say, basically it's kind of a colloquial slang, it is what it is. Meaning that if people grow up with one mindset, maybe a better way of saying it is just that a weakness would be that I'm very disappointed when I'm not able to I won't say alter, but assist the minds of individuals, assist an individual to open their mind to accept the way of looking at things differently. And so I would say that's a large weakness of mine, because I could take the approach that I don't care, but I'm a pretty sensitive man when it comes to stuff like that. And that's always something I find myself giving back to. And I think another weakness is that simply I'm a workaholic. And I think as being a workaholic, sometimes you become abused because you're willing to take things and willing to take when you don't have to, for the sake of trying to keep things going.
Wow. All right. We only have about 2 more questions, and I appreciate your time and your patience. What would you say would be a high point and say a low point through being a music minister?
I know there were 3 things that happened at the church that I've been at historically for so long, where I'm supposed to be this legendary musician. I think the high points were when I was able to lead this African American congregation of what I would call, and not negatively, average lay person, blue collar workers, into a very organized, very spirit-filled, extremely successful recording project. That was probably one of my highest things I could have done, because it was kind of like a dream of the church, but nobody knew how to get it through. It was very complicated, and we had like right at 400 people at that time in the music program, and it was like probably the largest. I got such a joy in knowing that I was responsible through the guidance of God, what He gave me, to impact all of these individuals, these regular people, with like a project that they could mail off to their aunts and their uncles and their friends, and they could say, look, this is my church choir. And it wasn't no regular run-of-the-mill project. It was a very high quality project of which we sold almost 200,000 copies of. That was a very, very high point for me. Another high point was when there was one concert in particular where I've always wanted the church to be able to have my ideal church music program would have been when we would have our traditional adult senior gospel choir. But I've always wanted to have a choir that would sing more anthems and hymns, but not in a manner that wasn't good. And I put on one concert at the church where I was able to take this very large church choir and sing the Battle Hymn of the Republic by Peter Woloski. And it was where I broke the fellas off into 4 parts. And I hired a classical pianist and a guy by the name of Dr. Leno Rivera to come in and play. And I remember how they fought me tooth and nails doing this. The whole 18 weeks it took us to do it. It was like pulling teeth because it was out of our normal genre. But how the church went totally wild after we did it, and they got such a joy in it. I was so proud of them, and I was so happy we did it, because I could see a sense of fulfillment on their face, and it made them feel like they had done something. I just only wish that I could share those sort of moments with them more. And my third one was when recently I was able to pull together 40 years of the music ministry in the church. And we put together one of the largest events in the history of the church, which is our 40th year music department celebration honoring 40 years of the congregation. We had a reunion choir, and we were able to bring a celebrity musician. So those were three things that stick in my mindset. A weak point has been, I've had many of those, but I would say the weak point has been, I'm just going to give a general statement. A weak point has been working in a congregation and working for congregations over the years, realizing and accepting the fact that many times people don't really sometimes care for you as a person. You just become a commodity. You just become a person who helps to build something, but nobody really gives you latitude as an individual. And that has been a lot of pain for me, where you work, and I can't say all congregations, but I would say the one that I've worked in, I can't really say that I have felt that the congregation has loved me. I felt that the congregation has loved what I've done. But sometimes I wonder if I sold myself short by staying in the church, that I felt that I was simply a commodity. But then it goes back to the fact that I felt that I really do feel that the Lord called me to this congregation. And I've stayed at this congregation through thick and thin, through so many things. But I would say a weak point has been accepting the fact that maybe the value of who I am as a person never has truly been seen. Even though the value of what I do has been seen, but the value I am of my heart has never really been seen.
Wow, that's pretty heavy. Pretty heavy. All right. We're almost done. Second to the last question, where do you see church music headed, say, in the next 5 years?
In a situation where people who are not willing to accept all the changes, the church music programs are going to fail miserably more, because churches now, unfortunately, are denouncing formality. That becomes the problem, because I think even though the Word of God is very formal in its presentation, the church itself, the community and society is beginning to denounce formality. People don't have the same appreciation. No, because the rise of electronic music and the rise that the realize gospel musicians generally sometimes they are given a lot of talent, but no formality. So the difficulty with that, especially in the Baptist church, is that the very nature of the Baptist church was created on formality and structure. So you have a very large division between what the organization of the church does as opposed to what it attracts. And the difficulty is that the rising congregation now is the non-denominational church, and how it impacts music is, unless the leader of the church is able to find a way to bridge the gap where you want to have formality, because I think the church is more than just a spiritual place. It's also a place by which people are to develop social skills to help impact their life and to develop a history. For some reason, the American church as it relates to Christianity is so different than Buddhism or the Islamic faith or the Muslimic faith. I find that Christianity is one of the only religions that constantly changes its exterior. If you go to a Muslim temple, it's the same as it was 100 years ago. And they cherish the tradition, what they have. Christianity don't cherish their biblical tradition of formality. and principles, and this impacts music. The only thing they cherish is always trying to make sure that whatever they do, everything is current. That's why in Christianity you have so many different denominations that are springing up from what is really not even there, and all of those different complications are going to impact the music ministry, because people are coming to church now thinking that they're going to a nightclub. They're not coming to church. There's no division between listening to sacred music and listening to R&B. It's kind of like, and I'm not stubby-wuffy, but I'm saying that the division is getting worse and worse, where the same sort of impact, everything is beat and drive and physical gratification oriented. Nothing creates mental, spiritual, contemplative thoughts.
Yeah.
So that's going. So I see that it's becoming more complicated as a rise of technology, and as churches sort of leads into this. And I'm going to say my last statement: when a church hires a musician with no trained skills, what they've done is that they validated musical ignorance. They themselves have become their own worst enemy. But on the other token, if a church hires a person with musical skills and that person doesn't have the ability to have any urban creativity in their musical presentation, the church has just taken away from their current marketing strategy in order to get members to come. So it becomes twofold. It becomes like 6 in one hand, half a dozen in another. Because once again, remember, there is no place for the African American church musician to go and receive training. There is none. There are none. Because when they go to the university, it's totally completely different, and they're dealing with classical music and what they read. Whereas the gospel music is built on the oral tradition of what you hear. So it's just complicated. There are no places where you can mix the two. Very, very few. And generally, what happens is no one has the understanding, and that goes back to your question of philosophy, how to value both and mix them together. So this is very complicated. You either hire the very well-trained former musician and you lose the youth and you don't motivate. Or you hire the youth with no skill and you get a bunch of urban kids and you have no middle-class membership because you don't have a person who understands how to create overall music ministry that is eclectic to bring a well-rounded congregation together. But you know what? That is really in the interview of the pastor. That's what the pastor has to earn his salary. So that becomes very complicated.
Yeah. So this will conclude our interview. I had one last item, and this just would be, if you care to. This really does conclude the interview, and I appreciate you taking out the time of your busy schedule. I know you're in demand, and you are highly thought of, and not just in the local community, in the national community. Everybody speaks about Dr. Henderson, and I've seen it myself and marveled at your playing skills, your ability to unite people, bring people together, and it's a true gift. Some of the comments you made kind of saddens me that a congregation can have such a jewel in the congregation but not really value its worth.
Right.
And we talk about it now, but I know sometimes when you're by yourself, you probably think about it and just say, "Wow," because.
But I want to answer that and then say one other last comment, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I think that it's as it relates to the emotional part of what I said earlier. I've come to grips with the fact that this is part of culture, and that one of the difficulties, if you notice, I'm a very contemplative man. Generally, and I'm not down it because I'm African American. Of course, I love the African American religious experience, but African Americans have a much more complicated social outlook as individuals. There are generally 8 African American churches to 1 Caucasian church. And many of the churches, generally when African Americans join a congregation, the church becomes their whole life. when a Caucasian sometimes joins the church becomes part of their overall experience. African Americans are historically people who do from what they hear. Caucasians are generally people who do from what they read. Black people, African Americans, look at Jesus Christ as being our deliverer, and many times Anglo-Saxons look at Jesus as being just Savior. So the African American put so much greater emphasis in their total life in the church, and as a result, dealing with all the economic disadvantages, dealing with all the different social disadvantages. Sometimes it makes it complicated because they want from the church what the church can't give them, because many times the injustices that they're trying to fulfill through a position in a church. Now, what does that have to do with music? It has everything to do with music, because then those are the individuals that make up the music ministry. So they, many times, to them, to not sing a solo in the church, they don't see the value in sometimes just being in the choir. And so that's why in so many African American churches you constantly find people fighting all the time, because they're trying to fulfill needs that are educationally based, that are worth based, that they don't get anywhere else. Whereas many of these factors exist in non-African American churches as well, but they're different type of things. Yeah. And so black folks basically hold on to the church for their dear life. So a position, whereas somebody said it best to me, they said, Professor Henderson, I was a concert pianist and very well known for 10 years. Then after that, I gave it up. And I said I need to move on. Whereas you find many musicians, and I know tons of famous musicians and noted people, I find that the ones who are African American try to hold on to it for dear life until they die. But the ones who are non-African American, they may be a great musician, have made great impact, but it comes to a point where they stop. And I'm not putting one above the next. I'm simply stating that success in a church for a black man or black woman is socially different than success. So what I would say is that these are things that I'm praying and hoping as ministry continues, and as a young brother like you going into the ministry, that you can help solve, because these are complicated issues that I don't think that people really think about enough, because no one talks about it. Contemplative sort of analytical thinking is not part of our culture as it relates to just dialogue. Our culture is a very gratifying, get quick, instant results type of culture, and the difficulty is that it doesn't work. So, I should say it brings more complications. And so I'm hoping that a young brother such as yourself, as you move into your church position, whether it's a small church, big church, that you will really look at all of the complications that as it relates to ministry, and be able to look in the future, not just to continue a tradition that's going to hurt us down the line, but to preach the word of God in such a way that it impacts the lives of the seniors, the middle-aged, the children, and to hopefully impede to have a congregation that is not only spiritually rewarding, but is socially and educationally moving towards a life where success can take more residence in the black church, so that many of the emotional problems can subside.
Okay. Well, on that note, this looks like a good point to end this interview. My prayer is that the Lord will continue to bless you to be that beacon in the community. A lot of lives you've touched, young people, a lot of young musicians today. I've seen many that are going forward and doing great things based on your tutelage. So thank you. Pray that God continue to bless you, and I appreciate this time.
God bless.